big contrast between working for a private company and working on a topic like this. And for me, the biggest difference is the impact that you get to have with a couple hours of code. If you're already a developer, writing code starts to feel like a very everyday thing, and we tend to forget that to people who can't code, being able to program, being able to tell the computer what to do is a lot like having a superpower. It's a really big deal. So I really strongly encourage you all to use your superpowers for good. And one way to do that is to fight human trafficking. So what is human trafficking? I'm going to focus on sex trafficking because that's the majority of the cases that our office handles, which frankly is because labor trafficking cases are really, really hard to detect, which is actually one of the areas that we could use your help in, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So just a disclaimer, I'm not going to show any photos or videos of human trafficking activity, but I am going to give a couple case examples, so prepare yourselves. A sex trafficker is someone who profits from prostitution by using force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone to engage in prostitution by means of instilling fear. And when you talk about human trafficking, many people imagine someone being kidnapped and forced basically at gunpoint to engage in prostitution. So the first thing that you need to know is that there are many ways to instill fear, and physical force is just one of those ways. We've had traffickers tell their victims that they owe the trafficker a large debt that they need to work off. We've had them use their immigration status against them or threaten to tell the victim's family about their prostitution activity. All of those qualify as sex trafficking as well. So this is an example of physical force. This is a conversation between a trafficker, Karmik Rampias, and an unknown person about whether or not he hurt himself while assaulting his victim. And he's saying, "No, I'm good. I stomped that bitch ribs." So this is an upsetting conversation. This is an example of physical force. We also see a lot more examples of subtle psychological manipulation as well. So in this case, two of a trafficker's victims are out working together, and he's instructing each of them at the exact same time to each hold all of the money and to watch each other and not trust each other. So he's planting the seeds of mistrust and doubt between them, and he's able to control them even when he's not physically with them. Sometimes people wonder why a victim of trafficking wouldn't just leave if they're left alone or if they're sent to a hotel on their own, and it's often because of these forms of psychological manipulation. We have many cases where the person being trafficked doesn't hold all the money. They have no funds of their own. They have nowhere to go home to. So if they were to try to leave, they would have nowhere to go. So the second thing that you need to know is that human trafficking is not just a horrible affront to human rights. It is an unbelievably lucrative, profitable business. It is big business. The International Labor Organization estimated that trafficking generates $150 billion a year in profit for traffickers. So just to put that in context, you would have to combine the net income of Apple, Microsoft, Google, IBM, Samsung, Walmart, and Coca-Cola to get up to that number. When you imagine a really lucrative trafficking operation, you might imagine a large number of traffickers who are all working together. This was one trafficker in New York City. He trafficked 3 victims, including a 16-year-old runaway, and after 3 years, he had $209,000 in cash. I don't know if you can see, but those are $100 bills wadded up there. He took a 16-year-old girl and he turned her into a walking ATM for him. So the last thing that you need to know is that human trafficking is not just a global problem. This is a heat map of the calls made to the Polaris human trafficking hotline. You can see it covers the entire country. This is not just a global problem, this is our problem. And actually, we're pretty close to Penn Station. We've had quite a few busts around here, so this is really our problem. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimates that 1 in 6 runaways are likely sex trafficking victims. And they estimate that there has been almost a 900% increase in the number of runaways who become sex trafficking victims since 2010. This is a very personal problem for our country. Many people imagine sex trafficking involving people getting smuggled across borders, but that's definitely not a necessity, although many people are particularly vulnerable due to their immigration status. Many victims of human trafficking are born in the United States and might be particularly vulnerable because of their economic status, their financial status, if they're homeless. We actually had a trial this year against a trafficker who recruited victims out of a homeless shelter right in New York City. So this is a personal problem. It takes place right in New York City. I can virtually guarantee you that within a block or two of where we're sitting right now, someone will be trafficked tonight. So, okay, that's probably all really, really depressing. Fortunately, you can do something about it. The great thing about human trafficking is that it leaves behind an electronic footprint. Traffickers post advertisements of their victims on online prostitution websites. They use Facebook and other social media to recruit additional victims. They leave electronic breadcrumbs of money laundering within their financial records. All that electronic evidence is something that a programmer can do something about. And that evidence is really important. Human trafficking cases are really difficult to prosecute. Victims are often way too traumatized to be able to testify, so we need to be able to build cases that are based on hard evidence. And that's where a programmer can really step in. I don't do this work alone. I work on a team that includes attorneys, 5 analysts, 2 investigators who go out in the field, just like in the movies, a full-time social worker, and I communicate with them constantly to make sure that I'm building the right tools to solve the right problems. And I want to highlight that the tools that I build are not complex. They're mostly Flask and Django applications that any of you can build, that a beginner programmer can build if you're not an advanced developer yet. These are skill sets that you have and that you can contribute if you want to. So I'm going to go through some of my goals for the unit when I'm building tools because, again, it's really important to build the right tools. There's no point in building a beautifully engineered tool if it's not going to get used and if it's not going to have an impact on the team. So my first goal, and I think a positive goal for any industry that doesn't have technology being used as much as it can be, is to provide technological infrastructure. So for us, the first tool that I built for the unit was a case tracker that just lets us know at a glance what our ongoing investigations are and that lets us manage our team. And having that kind of technological infrastructure helps with every other goal on this list. The second goal is to be able to triage cases as quickly as possible. And our goal, the reason that that's really important is that we want to be able to connect a victim to our social worker and to be able to intervene as quickly as possible. If we can get a victim counseling, housing services, immigration support, that leads to better case outcomes, and it leads to better outcomes for the survivor. The third goal is just to save analyst hours. Anytime that a person is going through a 50,000-page document, page by page, that's a problem, and that's something that a programmer can do something about. The fourth goal, and possibly the most important, is to find new leads, to be able to proactively identify cases of human trafficking. I think that there are a lot of opportunities for programming to do this. I would say that this is the goal that we're working on now and that we need the most help with. So the fast triage of cases. How do we do that? We get human trafficking cases from all kinds of places. We partner with many NGOs that give us tips. It's pretty rare that a victim will actually proactively ask for help, but it does happen. We also proactively screen all domestic violence and prostitution cases. So there are over 6,000 domestic violence cases in Manhattan a year, and we found an alarming connection between domestic violence and human trafficking. We screen those cases for signs of human trafficking using a couple tools. One of them is to screen against the presence of online prostitution advertisements. So if we see a domestic violence case, there's the element of force. If we see a connection to the prostitution world, that's already a red flag for us for human trafficking. We at least want to look into it. And we're able to do that check before a human being, before an analyst even looks at it. There's some amazing tools that we use that were actually developed by DARPA. There's an API, so we hit that before a human being looks at it. We also screen leads for connections to existing investigations, again, before a human being has to look at it. So we're saving a tremendous amount of time by doing this programmatically. If we get a tip in about an address and we see that we already have 2 other cases with a connection to that address, that immediately elevates that in our sort of case queue. So just looking at the evidence of that, Manhattan prostitution arrests are going down substantially, but the percent of those arrests that we screen for signs of human trafficking has gone up. We developed Case Tracker and started using techniques like that really in 2016. Tech infrastructure. I'm going to show you if this works. Our Case Tracker. So this is all fake data. Those are Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that are analyzing our cases, and those are Power Rangers that are prosecuting them. And I used a fake name generator for the victims and targets, no real people. So this is a simple Flask application. It uses the data tables jQuery plugin. It's a simple application, but it's been transformative for our unit. So at a glance, you can see the open investigations. You can find a case if you're looking for it. You can see that we have 2 fields here that are dedicated to our social worker. So as we're doing that quick triage, an analyst or a prosecutor could immediately flag the case as a case where our social worker might want to reach out to provide services or counseling. And she'll do that really quickly. This also helps us manage our cases. If our unit chief wants to go through all of one of these turtles' cases with them, she can choose the analyst, go through it with them, quick and easy. Our analyst has the opportunity to flag a case as something they think they should close out, and they'll do that together. Because this is not in an Excel sheet, it's a little data table, we can, when assigning a new case, our unit chief can see what the case workload looks like and assign it appropriately. It's pretty easy to add and edit new cases. So it's a simple application, but it's made a really big difference for us. We've built in a little bit of additional functionality, like the ability to automatically create a folder and a template case write-up on our drive, and I can show you what those look like quickly. Of course, none of this is opening up where I want it to. Stripped out some of this information, but it pre-populates some of the information for you. It's just a quick, simple tool. We've created buttons to draft emails to the social worker just to triage as fast as possible and to create a meeting invite to go over the case together. I've stripped out some of this for security reasons, but this is more or less the application. It's the first app we built, and this on its own really changed the way our unit operates. So with a little bit of Python programming, you really can make a difference. Victim services. Because we have this data now, we also can generate statistics on our unit's performance. So we could look at things like the percent of the time that we reach out and offer services to victims. There are a whole bunch of reasons why we wouldn't reach out. Usually it's because we are concerned about the safety of the victim, and reaching out we think isn't a strategically great idea, or we don't want to alert the trafficker to our activity, or any number of other reasons. But that's one of the things that we really want to stay on top of. The other goal is just to save analyst hours. These are photos I took of the file boxes that line the hallways in our office. It's not particularly glamorous work for a programmer, but it's really quick and easy for a programmer to save thousands of hours for an analyst. A few weeks after I joined, we had a case with an analyst who got back 10,000 individual folders that she was clicking through individually to try to find what she needed. There was no way to sort it chronologically. Each folder just had a little XML file. It takes basically no time at all for a programmer to turn that into something that an analyst can actually use and spit it into a spreadsheet. And we're drowning in documents, so. Okay, so finding leads and how to help. If you want to help with any of this work, we take volunteers. I'm the only programmer on my unit, but we love partnering with people. We actually just partnered with Hack NY this summer, and they built an app for us that's already being used by investigators in the field, so that's really exciting. So if you want to help, email me. If you want other ways to use your superpowers for good, check out the links on the screen. These slides and the code for the case tracker will be on GitHub shortly. And yeah, we've got a little bit of time, so if you guys have questions, feel free to ask them. I hope this wasn't traumatizing. You can really help if you want to help. Yeah.
So is there, you said you were, I'm assuming making it open source, like the code tracker stuff. I don't know, is there much of a network of these kinds of tools out there yet, or is this sort of like the first venture?
This is definitely a first venture. I'm the first person at my office with my job title, and programming in general is just not being used in this space as much as it should be yet, but yeah. So if that answers your question. Yeah.
Is there concern that kind of going to kind of become a cat and mouse game of you're going to have techniques to detect this and then people come up with ways to get around it?
That's possible, but I think we have to catch up first before they can do that. Yeah. Yeah.
What kind of efforts are you looking for volunteers?
From volunteers, so there are. Well, come talk to me after the talk, but we have quite a few ideas for additional tools that we'd like to build, and we just don't have the manpower yet. We could use software engineers, data scientists, whatever your skills are, we can definitely find a use for it. Yeah. Yes?
Do you know if like other cities are doing similar work, and if so, like have you tried like talking to them about
We haven't seen other cities doing similar work yet. There is some amazing work being done by a prosecutor in Seattle, but not along these lines. I don't believe any other prosecutors' offices working on human trafficking have coders yet. Yes?
What's the process for diagnosing the needs and then translating the sort of non-technical needs into a specifications document?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm really embedded within the team. I meet with the users. It's nice to work right down the hallway from your users. It's kind of a luxury in software development to be able to just call someone and ask a question. So it's pretty informal. It's really just on an ongoing basis. We are talking constantly. I've actually had an analyst sit down and write code with me at certain points when they were curious about how something was going to work out. Yes?
So you said 1 in 6 runaways end up being sex trafficked.
Yeah. And that's only those that are actually reported.
So
Yeah.
what actually happens when they run away to them getting to that point? And then secondly, is there anything we're trying to do to like prevent them from ever getting to that point as opposed to tackling it afterwards?
That's a great question. So we're not entirely sure what happens along the way. Many victims of sex trafficking get recruited online Many are in home situations where they don't feel safe, and someone convinces them that they're going to be safe elsewhere, and they're not. We've actually seen traffickers recruiting at the bus stop at Penn Station, just going going to people who look vulnerable and recruiting them directly. So we're working pretty actively with people along every step of that to try to prevent it from happening. But as far as, the online work, we could use your ideas, frankly. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, you said that your job is the first of its type in the office. I'm curious, how that job was created. Was you asked them to, or they made it? What the title is?
Yeah.
How-
So our unit chief basically went rogue and wanted to hire a programmer. Actually, I'm the first person with my job title. Someone came in before me, Eric, who actually gave the talk yesterday, and was building more data science focused tools for a little while, and then I came on board. So yeah, it's just one person had a good idea. I don't know. Okay, yep.
I've heard that DA's office is starting to use more extended use of tech for things like cybersecurity and other factors.
Yes.
Do you work at all with them, or is there much overlap?
I work pretty actively there. So we haven't hired many programmers in that area yet. I work pretty proactively with our high-tech analysis unit, which is more involved in forensics. I think that those areas are also areas where we could really be using technology a lot more and building these types of tools, but I haven't seen it done very much yet. Yes?
I wanted to ask, how easy is it to get started as a volunteer? Are there any problems with data confidentiality, or as a volunteer, would you ever actually see any data?
That's a great question. There are issues with data confidentiality. It depends what stage you would be helping with. There are a lot of proactive, investigative. There are a lot of ways you can help with proactive investigations that would be based on more open data. So if you're hitting the internet and trying to find signs of human trafficking, you obviously wouldn't need any sign-off to use that kind of data. It'd be more if you wanted to use arrest data, search warrant data, we obviously can't share. So it really depends, yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.